Yeah, look, Secretary Blinken has been under international pressure, but also pressure here in the United States to essentially try to rein Israel in when it comes to its attacks on Gaza to root out Hamas. Look, there was wide outrage around the world, particularly here in the United States, after the October 7th attack on Israeli civilians by Hamas. But the issue is that we've seen these images coming out of Gaza of thousands of innocent civilians being victims of these airstrikes and bombardments, many of those civilians children. So the US and Israel have both been under pressure to really deal with this situation. So I think what you're seeing Blinken do here is really thread that diplomatic needle and walk a very, very fine line in terms of expressing support for Israel while at the same time acknowledging the humanitarian crisis that's happening in Gaza. We know that there have been some pauses that have taken place and have been recommended for humanitarian purposes, but there's still a lot of pressure on Israel and the United States to do more to ensure that more Gazans and Palestinians in Gaza are, get to safety.
No doubt this will be a hot button issue when President Biden meets his Chinese counterpart Xi Jingping on Wednesday on the sidelines of APEC in the San Francisco Bay Area. How do you expect the discussions around the Middle East will be framed?
I think they'll be framed very delicately because remember, China's sort of in this odd position. We've seen that in the Ukraine war, for example. China has also walked a very fine line of not wanting war to break out, in Europe and spread, while at the same time wanting to keep Russia as an ally. And we do know that Russia can be traced to the situation happening in the Middle East due to Hamas's ties with Iran and Iran's subsequent ties with Russia. So these two conflicts in many ways are very much linked. And China is keeping a very close eye on all of this because China knows, this could have potentially, if it spreads, have an impact on the global economy, but also they're aware of, sort of where the U.S. is coming from on this and where Russia's coming from.
What else do you expect President Biden will put on the table in that meeting?
I think there's definitely going to be, talk of surveillance and spying. Earlier this year, there was that Chinese spy balloon, actually a few Chinese spy balloons that were seen here in the U.S. So I think there's definitely going to be some tension there. I'm sure Taiwan will be a huge point of discussion, or the Americans would want to make that at least some point of discussion. I think there's concern that China could be encroaching there, and there's concern for Taiwan's security. So I'm curious to see if Biden will bring that up. But once again, very much a diplomatic tightrope that Xi Jinping and Biden are essentially walking at this point.
Back to politics on your home soil this week. There was, of course, the third Republican debate. I think I read one headline that said, everyone's shouting accusations. It's kind of like a Thanksgiving dinner. How would you have characterized it?
Yeah, that sounds very familiar. As an American, definitely seems like Thanksgiving. But look, in terms of how I would characterize it, I think Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, was the clear winner coming out of it. I think Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who have sort of struggled to stand out throughout these debates, he also had a relatively good night. But Nikki Haley's the clear winner. The issue, though, is that you have Haley and DeSantis essentially battling for second place, and Trump, who wasn't even on stage, he was holding a rally just a few miles down the road. He's continuing to dominate the polls. So the big takeaway is, I think, a big question: do these debates ultimately matter when they're not really moving the needle? I mean, they are a little bit for Haley, but not in a substantial way.
Yeah, it's interesting you speak about the former President Trump there. He also, his family was also in court this week over the civil case. An ex-Watergate prosecutor claimed that Trump is toast, I was reading. What are your predictions on what this will mean for him and materially for his businesses and his family's business?
Yeah, look, I'm not a legal expert, so it's hard for me to, come at it from that perspective. But politically, we've seen it actually help Donald Trump in the polls, particularly with his own Republican primary base. Look, Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, was someone who literally campaigned on prosecuting Donald Trump. So it's very easy for Donald Trump to say, roll the tape and point to that and accuse her of politicizing this. That being said, though, there's a lot lot of money at stake for Trump and the Trump organization. And if he has to pay millions of dollars, that could be a big dent to the organization, especially as he's getting ready to not only run for president again, but also to face these other court dates he has coming up, not only civil ones, but also criminal ones coming up. So it's definitely not convenient for Trump overall, but politically, we don't see it really hurting him yet.
Julia Manchester, great speaking with you. Thank you for joining us on Weekend Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.